Welcome, everyone. I'm Brian Kulak, the Chief Academic Officer for the district.
And I'm Dave Walsh, high school chemistry and science teacher. And I guess we're going to go over some Danielson stuff, right, Brian?
Yeah, so if this is the first time you've joined us and you started in Domain 3, then this will all be new to you. If not, and you went in another order, you've kind of heard our purpose for this. We just want you to be as informed as possible from both an administrative and a teacher perspective for what is supposed to be done and looked for when observations happen. Today we're going to talk about instruction, which is not arguably the most important part of what you do. And each of these is a little bit different, but obviously like any other domain, all these components, which are here with a number and a letter, do support each other. So the first one is communicating with students. So, this might sound simple and some of the language might be simple, but we just want clarity in whatever you're teaching. So this goes to your content knowledge and your pedagogical knowledge. But we also want to make sure, and Dave will talk more about this, that you're aware that there are times during which you're going to speak to the whole class a certain way, and you're going to speak to individual students or groups in another way, so that your vocabulary and your usage and your content knowledge and your jargon is all there, but you also are speaking to the kids like humans, which I think is going to get you a long way.
Yeah, and I even let my kids in on the little secret that I have my teacher personality. Like when I'm out in the hallway and I'm yelling and screaming and in a good way, like, hey guys, what's going on? That's in front of the whole group and everybody sees that I'm positive and crazy and all that stuff. But when I get into a smaller group or an individual, I very rarely do that sort of, loud, obnoxious stuff. I'm talking to them as if they're a real person. Which they are real. I guess they are real people. Right. But I'm talking to the students like I would my own family. Like we're talking and we're interacting, and I'm listening to what they say, because that's, I think, makes the best communicator somebody who listens and then reacts to the listening, whether it's positive or negative. So sometimes you have to put your ego in a little bit of a check there.
But yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about ego and lecture and our philosophy as a district here as we go through. But that's a good point, the active listening, which does lead then to this one. And we are certainly getting better with this as a district, using questioning and prompts and discussion. And what we're going to tell you over and over again is you gotta give up control. You have to let the kids dictate how these discussions go. We have at the secondary level, we're going to do a whole push towards presentation literacy, and certainly at the elementary school with mini lessons, read alouds, shared reading, guided reading. Everything is going to be predicated on what the kids are saying more so than what the adults are saying. Let the kids talk to each other.
Yeah, let them talk to each other. And a lot of times when we're using questioning or prompts in the formal classroom or the informal classroom, the questioning and the prompts and that discussion doesn't necessarily have to be a formal, here's something, write, respond, grade. It can be more informal, and then reacting to those things too. It doesn't have to be necessarily something that you do it, but allowing those students to use that to guide their own learning is definitely a key in 3B.
Yeah, challenge yourself to say less. If you can get through a lesson, particularly an observational lesson where you're saying very little and your first concern is, wait a minute, I didn't do a lot of teaching today because I wasn't speaking, I would say that's incorrect. Let yourself step off the stage after you set that stage and let the kids take over.
Right, let the students do more of the work than you.
Yep, and you're going to hear us say that on these videos often. 3C is engaging students in learning, and while we prepared for this, Dave said, well, I think this is actually the easy one. We're going to talk about grouping. How are the kids grouped in class? How are the kids engaging in different activities, both within the same lesson, within the same unit, and then overall in the course? And most importantly, this will look different for different kids. You may have a kid in the back who looks completely disengaged, who then will say something later in the class, fire off an email or write a paper that is amazing to let you know that he or she was engaged. And unfortunately, vice versa applies too, where a kid could seem engaged, but really is not.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Engagement looks different for different kids and for different teachers. So it's important that your students are completely engaged as much as you can get them in a lesson. I think that everybody understands that that we shoot for 100% engagement, but that's not necessarily going to happen all the time. So we're looking for things that are engaging, and whether they are engaging the students, you know, so you can modify that as you go too. You know, it's, you know, maybe you need a pause and take a minute and stretch, and that's okay. You know,
we talk about modifying a lot, and we also earlier in Domain 1 talked about knowing your students, and this is huge. If you know your students, you will know how to engage them. If it's a class that does not respond to lecture, you want to put the lectures away as much as you can. If they need to have constant oversight because it's one of those kind of squirrely groups, that's fine too. But you need to know your kids to know how to engage them.
Yeah. Engagement.
Using assessment in instruction, which is 3D. We are a huge feedback district. In fact, that was one of the major pushes last year that I led, which was, are we really providing feedback, or are we providing advice or value judgments? Our feedback has to be specific and timely and student-driven so that when you are providing an assessment, you can almost expect there to be the feedback about that assessment that can either drive the instruction one way or the other. So again, when you are owing to the kids with the assessments that you create, you should be able to determine if your learning outcomes are being met, and if not, how can you adjust to make that happen?
And I will say as a teacher, again, and I've been harping on this a little bit during this domain, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be formal, you know, feedback that's written on a paper, or, you know, having a conversation with a student, an objective conversation about their work, can be just as meaningful or more meaningful than other sort of more formal sorts of assessments. And you can then allow the students to use that to better their work. And so, you know, yeah, there's the formal assessment, which is kind of that's the layup. You know, you can give a great test and you can give a great quiz and you can give a great thing, but it's the informal assessment, I think, that to include all of that informal formative assessment is definitely pushes you over into the 3s and 4s. You know,
I also think this goes back to communicating with students. When a kid does respond to feedback, you need to celebrate that and celebrate it out loud and talk about how wonderful that comment was, or how we can find a way to better learn the material based on what the kids said. So you keep hearing us say we're turning over control to the kids as much as we possibly can, which I know is difficult, but hopefully getting easier, particularly with the leadership and support in the district. And finally, 3E, demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness.
And that's what we've been talking about the whole time,
Yeah,
is
really
that, you know, like everything that we've been doing is flexing into, you know, making sure that we're engaging the students and making sure that they are learning, you know. So that's.
And one of the things that Dave said in preparation for this is we have to allow the students to decide what they need, not just teach what we think they need. And again, that's a really difficult thing. It was for me in the classroom, and I know it is for a lot of folks. When you just feel so passionate about what you want them to learn, that's great, but we also have to be mindful that they are going to help us understand what they want to learn as well.
And that's setting the stage. Brian was talking about setting the stage earlier. And, you know, so you start them down the road and then you let them figure out what they want to learn, you know. So there's a lot of formal and informal ways to do all of this these sort of things. So, you know, all of teaching is demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness, which you should say, you know, like everything from the beginning to the end.
And we'll talk about this probably later too, but I just want to mention here that our district is extremely supportive of teacher-to-teacher observation, which has nothing to do with this in terms of evaluation, but more, hey, I just want to try this out. I know there's an administrator coming in. Can you take a look at my lesson? Please do that in any of these areas specific to the actual teaching. Because that's where you really want to hone your craft. And to do that in isolation, I think, is pretty dangerous. As much as you might know or the experience you might have, there are other people here who can help you.
Yeah, and I think that when you open yourself up to that from a teacher, you get a little bit different experience, and that may be maybe a little less intimidating, maybe a little more likely for you to kind of to take those advices kind of like, oh, let's think about doing those things. So, you know, having another teacher or friend come into the classroom that is a teacher is definitely a very powerful way to move ahead in your career.
Okay, so thanks again for watching, and we will see you next time.